a fairness of equality. Why would you say? I'd say it's because of a subtle form of anti-Semitism. It is, yes, it is true, there is anti-Semitism in parts of the Quran, but there were also periods in the world of the Mediterranean and Western Europe in which it was probably safer for Jews in the Ottoman Empire than it was, say, in Christian Europe in 1618 to 1648 during the middle of the 30 Years' War, when Protestants and Catholics were killing one another by the hundreds and thousands and millions because of the difference between consubstantiation and transubstantiation in the Eucharist. So we Christians had our periods of religious intolerance as well. Probably the salient version, or the salient time, was the Spanish Inquisition. And I don't mean the Inquisition as played in riotously funny fashion by Mel Brooks in History of the World Part 1. I mean the real Torquemada. It would be impossible to talk about the Spanish Inquisition and not even mention the Catholic Church. The Inquisition was an offshoot of it, a totalitarian offshoot that burned Jews, Muslims, and dissident Christians at the stake. And it was not a natural part of the church, but it was an outgrowth from it. You can't understand it without talking about that. And you cannot understand what is going on in the Middle East today, or understand Islamist longing for a caliphate, a theocratic dictatorship, or the rules of Sharia, their hideous treatment of women and all the rest. You cannot understand that without realizing that it is one offshoot of Islam. It is not all of Islam. I once had dinner a couple of times with Abdul Rahman Wahid, the former president of Indonesia. What a remarkable man, and what a remarkable spokesman for international tolerance. Abdul Rahman Wahid's great-great-great-great-grandfather was a religious leader at the time the Javanese, speaking for moderate Islam, defeated the Chinese and Arabs, who were the Wahhabis of their time, before the Wahhabis themselves existed. And Abdul Rahman Wahid, after he was president, recruited Indonesia's leading young rock star, who was a man committed, as was Abdul Rahman Wahid, to religious liberty. They traveled around Indonesia together, holding rock concerts at soccer stadiums for kids. The rock star would write songs about religious liberty and lead them and teach them to the kids, and Abdul Rahman Wahid would talk about it, and they would go around. Their organization was called Lib for All, Liberty for All. There is that tradition in Islam. So we need to be careful and focus on what the problem is that we are facing. The problem we are facing in its contribution to anti-Semitism and much else besides is Islamism, is essentially the push for the acceptance of Sharia, for the Islamic law of a particular character that has come down through the ages and especially out of the desert of Arabia. It is extraordinarily brutal to women. It is in favor of death for apostates, death for homosexuals, extraordinarily hostile to Christians and Jews, and deeply committed to the notion of establishing a theocratic dictatorship, a caliphate. It is in no way compatible with Western justice and democracy or our Constitution. It is a completely foreign form of politics and government. It is not adhered to by many Muslims in the United States. I was chairman of the board of Freedom House back several years ago, and we had a group of American Muslims come to us with documents that they said Saudi visiting clerics had left in their mosque, and they'd taken away their worship materials, and they'd left these, and they said, we've translated these for you out of Arabic, but translate them, have somebody translate them for you. You'll see they're awful. We'd love to have you publish them or something and show what the Saudis are doing. So we had them translated, and they were awful. They were Sharia. So we published them. That was not a popular thing with the Saudi embassy. But that set of views is unfortunately taught by the majority of the mainline Muslim schools and institutions in the world because, as Lawrence Wright says in his wonderful book, The Looming Tower, about 9/11, with between 1% and 2% of the world's Muslims, the Saudis control about 90% of the world's Islamic institutions. So that means whether the madrasa, the school for boys, is in the West Bank or Fairfax County, Virginia, or Rawalpindi, the odds are about 9-1 that it is teaching those hatreds and that brutality. That creates a situation in which we have to recognize the nature of the enemy that we are facing and be candid about it. It is amazing that the U.S. government could write, the Pentagon could write a detailed history of Major Hassan's killing of his 13 fellow soldiers and never mention the word Islam. It does not mean all Muslims are terrorists. It means he is an Islamist and his behavior was influenced by that Wahhabi-led, Sharia-focused tradition. We will not win this struggle if we only defend. We must be sound, we must be fair, we must defend our friends, the Jews, against the kind of anti-Semitism that they are faced with, some of it coming from these roots. But playing defense is not enough. Let me suggest 2 steps that we need to take. First is that we borrow, when oil is $80 a barrel, about $1 billion a day to import oil. Hundreds of millions of that goes to the Middle East. When oil gets up to the level it was 2 years ago, nearly $150 a barrel, we are borrowing $2 billion a day to import oil. It is a huge strategic problem for us. But it also creates a situation in which the ability of, say, Saudi Arabia to put those publications in the mosques in the United States that the Muslims brought into us in Freedom House is worldwide a simple rounding error in the many hundreds of billions of dollars that they have available to devote to spreading that view and that stance of Islam around the world. If you are wondering the next time you're out driving and you get a little low on gas, if you're talking to yourself a little bit and wondering who's paying for those little 8-year-old Pakistani and West Bank boys to be taught to want to be suicide bombers. When you pull into the station, before you get out